Welcome to Seeking the Sacred Self. I'm your host, Naomi Rozak. This week, we'll talk about why I use the word sacred to describe how we connect to our inner selves, and some examples of how the sacred self lives out through us, and describe why that connection is so important and how it's so easily disrupted when we are children. As a little recap, we've talked about what the sacred self is in a minor way, and I'm going to go through that a little bit more in detail with some examples. And know that these are only examples. There's much more to this. There's also a lot of overlap between how the different parts of the sacred self and the different ways we connect play out. For example, if something plays out physically in our bodies, our emotions might also be felt physically. This is a holistic view of the self, and there's an interplay of all these pieces. They cannot be separated out. And because of that, there's also an overlap between them. And I'm just giving a partial view of this. I could probably go on and on about the kinds of connections and the multiple ways sacred self moves and plays out through us. So to begin with, the sacred self is the inside essence of us. It's who we are born as, complete with a life intention, with purpose, with a natural inborn wisdom, with propensities, talents, or giftings, and with its own voice. And so if I address first the sacred self as an inner voice, we quote unquote hear this voice in many ways, which we won't go into detail with, but the biggest way we know whether we're living from that inner self is the feelings of expansion and resonance and energy in our body when we're in alignment. And then the feelings of constriction, heavier emotions, emptiness, etc., when we aren't. I want to emphasize that although I use the word voice, it doesn't necessarily mean hearing something audible or using internal or external words, although it can. This voice tells us what we dream of doing or being in life. And it's often so simple that we doubt it. We write it off. We think it's our ego speaking. My inner voice told me for years I'm meant for more than this. And I thought that was selfishness when really it was my sacred self bubbling up inside saying, there's more to me than only mothering or only housekeeping or only being a friend. These things fulfill a part of me, but much more is unfulfilled. And eventually I learned to trust that piece and let it show me what it wanted over time. And then if we talk about examples of giftings we're born with within the sacred self, some examples might be a unique perceptive ability, an ability to think with big ideas or small details. We might be born with a strong nurturing capacity. We might be able to connect easily with animals or children, with the more vulnerable of us. We might have strong analytical skills, or we might be really good at helping people to feel at ease, and so many more. And oftentimes, the sacred self giftings that we have are not always valued by our society. They are softer skills. They may be a huge empathy or non-judgment, an ability to, really connect with people, but not in a salesy way, not in a superficial way, a deep way where you see people and they feel seen by you. And that's hard to put on a resume, right? Unless you have just the right niche job. So know that even though you may not be able to see some of these inside yourself, doesn't mean you don't have them. It takes a different perspective to know and value what those pieces are. And that's a reason why we can feel so out of place sometimes if our giftings are not those that necessarily line up with obvious career choices or university programs. And then we can talk about purpose, the sacred self arriving with a sense of purpose on the earth. This is when we're pulled towards serving or being part of a certain group of people, a mission, a sense of feeling more connected to live in this way than in that way, even if that way works for other people. Purpose can be when we get into a state of flow, a sense of timelessness, when we feel like we could do a certain thing forever. It's not always directed towards serving other people, but about seeing and expressing yourself in your most natural or fulfilled way. So when I talk about the inner voice of wisdom, this is referring to the idea that we all have a place of knowing inside. We often live separate or disconnected from it, but when we get in touch with it, This feels like a truth in our whole body, something that we have a deep knowing about. Last episode, we talked about the not this moments. This is often a moment of connecting to that inner voice, that sense of truth that speaks loud enough and uncomfortably enough that we finally hear it and realize we can't live the way we are anymore. That is a deep inner knowing that something isn't working for us, and that is directly from the core of you. And then again, this inner voice, this inner knowing is not always uncomfortable. Sometimes it's a very obvious and comfortable, welcoming truth, a sense of like, oh, yes, this makes sense, or this is who I really am. So the sacred self also lives out through us and provides messages through our unique physical body and our personality. So in our body, this might be our feelings, our intuition, our inner and outer senses, our kinesthetic senses, our knowledge of where our body is in space, so many different ways that we just take as like biological things, but our inner self lives out through our biology. This might mean we have a desire to move our bodies a certain way or to go see a certain person when we feel down because that friend meets a need that we have. We might want to eat a certain food when we aren't feeling nourished or when illness is coming on. And we might be attracted to and want to wear or make art with certain colors. And then if we talk about when something is unharmonious within us, we can talk about illness in the way that this connection of self through the body, through extreme stress or overgiving in a caregiving capacity or people pleasing for years, can end up in symptoms of illness. Again, the sacred self is speaking in no uncertain terms to say that it cannot tolerate living anymore in the patterns that we have lived in for most of our lives. And then when we talk about the sacred self living out through our personality, our sacred self essence might be just a little louder than other people, or we might like to have a bit wilder fun than the average person, or we might be very quiet, love to sit in nature, observe people, but not engage a lot. And the desires for things like playfulness and to contribute to the life of others or to have new and exciting experiences, these are not flaws. These are part of our makeup and part of how we express who the sacred self is and how we feel connected to it. So, another way we talk about the sacred self is that it is an internal GPS or navigation system for events and upsets of life. Through it, we know how to make decisions or what the next appropriate choice is. We can determine what our personal values are. We gain a knowledge that is sensed from our environment, not necessarily filtered through the thinking mind. This overlaps with intuition, right? We know how to act with courage and vulnerability. We gain the courage to do that even in the face of great risk from that place inside of us. And when something needs to be addressed or acted on, it's our sacred self that tells us when that time is, when something cannot or should not be avoided, whether that's inside of ourselves within a relationship. It's the thing that prompts us to action when action is necessary. And even in unique times, we can receive knowledge that we can't explain but helps us, the way a parent knows how a child is in danger without any good explanation for how or why. There's just this inner knowing and then this realization we have to go find that child right now. The last way I talk about the sacred self is that it's a center of wholeness through which we feel content, full, peaceful, and connected to our own selves, to other people, and to the entire world and universe around us in a felt way. This part of the sacred self brings us back to a place of internal balance, of harmony, of peace when upset has happened. Through it, we know how to accept and allow change and feelings of change to move through us. We know how to filter out non-resonant voices, shame, judgment, ones that don't reflect who we really are, and more. And it's the part that helps us know when we have met or unmet needs and can guide us to know how to meet those, whether they're by ourselves or we ask for support or go looking for resources. So that's the sacred self in a rather big nutshell. The many ways it comes to the earth with certain things and then how it expresses through the different pieces of us and the reason that it's there. So then on the flip side, you can see how when we feel disconnected, we aren't able to fulfill what is in us to do. We won't know ourselves. We won't know how to make decisions. We will second guess and overthink. We won't know our values. We'll get stuck in conflict and we'll repeat certain kinds of conflict. We'll struggle with fulfillment, what our identity is and what path we should follow. And we'll think about others' needs and opinions over our own. I could go on and on about this. Ask me how I know. The whole reason for these struggles is that we do not know our sacred selves. I mean, on some level, we're aware that we are a self. We know, yes, I'm a separate person from everyone else. Yes, I have my own thoughts and opinions. I have my own struggles and pains, my own desires and wants, and I don't have it all figured out. But we may spend all of our time hearing what other people think and trying to follow the path that others have laid out. And part of the struggle is that we have such a strong sense of other people's thoughts and feelings and not enough sense of our true selves without that influence. And the reason we've done this in reaction to pain and trauma and environments and people that don't 100% support our inner selves is that we don't see, know, or feel our own sacredness. I call this podcast Seeking the Sacred Self for a reason. When I talked about that fourth expression of the sacred self being a center of wholeness where we feel full, contented, peaceful, it's because one more function of the sacred self is to be the place where we deeply feel, see, and know with our entire awareness that we are worthy, accepted, and whole. It is a place inside us where we do not lack, where we do not feel inferior, where we recognize our worthiness is not hinged on how we act or serve or what we do or don't do, merely that we exist as a human soul in its own right, and we recognize and feel the essence of ourselves to be good and complete in itself, period. If you are here, alive, present, that means you are already sacredly, inherently whole. The self that you are arrived, sacred, connected like an inner spark or light, ready to take up the reins of life and your body and personality, ready to live out through you. And what this means is that only you can know you. Only you can hear that inner voice. Only you can feel that inner zap of connection to the center of you. Only you can tell us what you're called to, what you're interested in, what lights you up. Only you can know when something you are considering is out of resonance with your inner self. Only you can know the unique combination of circumstances and inner self that means an action or decision is the right way or the right timing. No one else has that insight. The connection from you to your inner self is a sacred connection, one that ought to be inviolable. And I looked this up on the internet. Inviolable means never to be broken, infringed, or dishonored. This means no one has the right to come in between you, the thinking, feeling, sensing, and acting personhood or body of you, and your ability to hear from and act out of the place of your sacred inner voice and your connection to all that is. This inherent sacredness of your inner self and your connection to it is your place of wholeness. And when you feel wholeness through all your being, you will act from that place of wholeness. Just as an example, if you are a chatty or a talkative person, you will be chatty and feel good in it, even if someone has a problem with it or reacts once in a while. If you're connected to your wholeness, you don't take their reaction personally as a reflection of who you are inside. It doesn't mean you might not learn that you don't have to be chatty 100% of the time in relationship with others. It means that you know that for you, chatty is good. It is whole. There is nothing wrong with being chatty. And from a place of wholeness, you can choose when to act out your chatty self. And then when you're a naturally chatty person and you're disconnected from your sacred self wholeness, you may have been told that being chatty is wrong. And so you second guess and shame yourself when you're mistakenly chatty at an event, or you judge yourself feeling that you've dominated the conversation, or you may rarely even speak because you believe that chattiness is so wrong that it is fundamentally unsafe for you to express it, that it will cause rejection and censure. This belief will alter every interaction you have and cause you to believe other people are judging you every time you open your mouth. And then you reach a certain point in life and you see someone else being chatty and being loved and accepted by others for being that way, and you feel unreasonably angry, triggered. Why do they get to be like that and be received and accepted and loved? And you get, well, what? What do you get? What did you get? When were you told, or when did you believe that your expression of yourself was wrong? That is where you lost connection to a piece of your wholeness. And you will be shown by what you are triggered by and by where you lose your peace, where you are missing pieces of sacred self connection. When you feel your sacred wholeness, you are more connected to you than you are to the opinions and actions and reactions of others. And when you feel reactive or triggered or activated, you can know that that's a place where your sacred connection to yourself has been broken, infringed on, or dishonored. Part of what our sacred self connection does is give us a sense of personal power. Power is a funny word right now, but this is not a power over others. This is the power of choice for our own selves. It's power to pause, to consider what's happening before reacting. It's a power that comes with self-knowledge, to know our own selves, to be able to discount what others say about us when we know what they say isn't true of who we really are. It's power to live out our own life path, to choose our own fulfillment, to say yes to what resonates for us, to find our own healing, to believe in and trust ourselves, to honor our own feelings. It's the power to say no to anything that takes away from our sacred selves, and power to run toward what internally frees us from the shame and baggage that has stayed with us our whole lives. Power to choose what honors our sacredness, and power to release everything that doesn't and let it go. You are sacred. You are whole. And when you listen to your inner voice, you honor your sacredness. But one more thing to talk about is the reason why so many of us have lost connection to our sacred selves. And that reason is that this connection is, in fact, easily infringed on, especially when we're young. So we may be little children, and in one event by our peers, in one statement from our parents, when we get a shaming reaction from some distant relative, or we watch something in a TV commercial or make a math mistake in school, we learn we're not sacred to somebody else. In that one moment, we learn we are undesirable or flawed in some way. We become aware of that other thing more than ourselves. And we desperately need and want the connection to that other person or people. We want to appear correct. So we unconsciously cut off the connection to that piece of ourselves so fast, so easily. And we then take on shame about that piece of ourselves, like that piece of me is bad or wrong. I can never show this to anyone else. I'm going to reject that piece of me forever because I can't tolerate the shame again. It happens in seconds even. This connection is susceptible to shame, abuse, and harm. It's easily interrupted, easily indoctrinated, easily put upon. It's pressured away from us, especially when we're so young. But then what we need to know as we're seeking our wholeness, seeking to rebuild connection, is the way back is to start holding that connection sacred again. Start to see where the places of disconnection are, why the connection was broken, and start to honor those places and the pieces they're meant to be connected to. Just know that in the beginning, the voice of the sacred self can be quite quiet. It can take a bit of work to start the reconnection process. Well, at the same time, it's less working. It's less of doing or trying something with more effort and more a letting go of something, more accepting, more allowing in some time for yourself that doesn't make you try harder or have to be more or have to be approved of or accepted by others. It's being able to stop performing or people pleasing or caregiving every second and starting to think of what the inner you might be wanting or needing, the neglected part of you, the part that was shamed away from you as a child. So wherever that connection has been broken, infringed upon, or dishonored is where the way back to connection is to repair, prevent yourself or others from infringing on, and honor yourself. Honor the person behind the judgment, the shame, or the pain that made you lose yourself. This means over time, with practice, honoring the way you naturally are, not the person you've been shaped into by people and places outside of yourself. Honoring your feelings, getting in touch with your intuition, building into relationships that see your sacredness and honor you. It means that as you're in this process of rebuilding connection to your sacred self, you might have to take a little time and space away from people and places where your sacredness isn't honored. And for a while, you may need to practice hearing just your inner voice, or only having people speak to you who are also in sacred connection with themselves, because then they will speak healing words in connection with their own inner wisdom. And these words will help you remember who you really are at the core. They help you connect to yourself more. And then, as this sacred self connection gets stronger and stronger, you will find it isn't so fragile anymore. The reason it's fragile to begin with when we're children is that we are young. We feel and know things, but we can't explain why or put them into words, and they come out in our behavior. And then we so need to be cared for by the people around us that when we have to choose between ourselves or being cared for by others, we will almost always choose to be cared for, even if it means we lose ourselves. But when we're grown up and we learn to stay connected to ourselves, we get very, very strong inside. It's because we're connected to that spark, that inner container of light, of purpose, of energizing knowledge that was in us when we're born. And it's so full of power and joy and fullness and wholeness that once we've tasted a little bit of that, we stay hungry for it. And we learn not to abandon self-connection so easily. We learn that our sacredness is worth knowing more than the good opinion of other people or ticking the boxes of achievement that society tells us to. We learn that we want to respect ourselves more than we want others to respect us. And we are adults who have the ability to care for ourselves and ask for care from appropriate other people. We have restored connection, and while we may occasionally lose touch in places where we aren't aware of it yet, or we slip backwards a little bit on the connection journey, any connection that we're actively aware of and have worked on will forevermore feel more alive and have a stronger pull for us. We can't ignore it as easily, and we don't want to, because feeling connected is so much better than feeling like we are missing something. And here's the interesting part. People around you will see, feel, and know the difference in you. To some, it will feel confronting. It's too honest, too real. It steps on the toes of their own broken connection. So they'll feel the pain of that, and they may react to your expression of your wholeness. But others who are hungry for wholeness or who have connected to it already themselves will selflessly reflect to you that they see that change in you, and they can tell that it's good, that it promotes their own healing and connection, and they're excited to see you authentically living out who you really are. And who wouldn't want that freedom? Like, who wouldn't want that power, that ability to choose? It's all we have ever wanted, to be ourselves and to know that the self is good. The self is sacred and worthy of being seen that way. Thank you for listening. If this episode resonated with you, please subscribe to the podcast and consider sharing this episode with someone else. And join me next time on Seeking the Sacred Self, where we go a little deeper again.